NFL free agency continues. Jordan Hicks, come on down. We're going to talk about everything that means, a little Michael Pierce update, and keep you updated on everything that's going on here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Ooh-wee!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome everybody to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your very first listen of the day. Today, it's still a tampering window. The actual league year will turn over today on Wednesday. So keep an eye out for everything actually officializing and contracts officially void and stuff like that. We'll talk about everything that needs to happen. It'll all kind of come up. But the real news of Tuesday was that the Vikings are expected to re-sign Jordan Barry. That's it. Yep, the punter's coming back. Probably. That was a report, I believe, by Darren Wolfson. Might have been Chris Thomason. It was a report. It hasn't happened, but that they intend to. They want to bring him back. So that's a thing. No, the real news is that the Vikings signed a linebacker. Jordan Hicks played for the Eagles and then the Cardinals. He's been a starter in the league for 7 years. They signed him to a 2-year, $10.5 million deal. And there's a couple of million on top of that in incentives, so it could go up all the way to a $12.5 million deal. That is the raw details. He is the newest member of the Vikings. That is enough money. And by the way, that he was a release. He was released in February by the Cardinals, which means he doesn't count toward the compensatory pick formula. So the Vikings do not get a canceled out compensatory pick, if that's something you were worried about. So he is getting paid enough money that's a starter salary. That you pay a guy $5 million up to $6 million a year, you expect that guy to play a lot. That's not a backup salary unless it's a quarterback. So that kind of is going to raise some questions. There might be a couple of alarm bells going on in your mind. We're going to talk about that. What does that mean for Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr? Would he replace one of those two? Should he replace one of those two? What are the options here? We'll get into all of that. And then at the end of the show, I just want to give you a quick update on Michael Pierce and Harrison Phillips and the whole thing that went down on Monday. There's a little more information about that. So I want to that broke in the middle of yesterday's show. Go listen to that, by the way. That's always fun when I'm trying to talk about something, then, update. But yeah, go listen to that. But I've got a little bit more clarity on that. So stick around to the end of the show for that. But first things first, what you need to know about Jordan Hicks. So he was a 3rd round pick for Philadelphia back, I'm going to say 2015. Correct me if I'm wrong there. It doesn't matter. He played there for 4 years, played out his rookie contract, signed as a free agent in Arizona, played out 3 years of that deal, and then he got released to save them cap space. They also they just drafted Zaven Collins, so there was a little bit of a redundancy there. They're getting a little younger. And so he had to go by the wayside. The big headline that everybody talks about is he started a lot of games, which is never going to be the most exciting thing to hear. But I mean, look, the best ability is availability and all that stuff. He's started 51 games in the last 3 years, which is a lot. And he's been very reliable, or he's played in at least, because he kind of lost his starting job. We'll get to that in a second. But he's been durable and available, and he's a veteran. He's the defensive play caller until they gave that to Zaven Collins. And then he kind of trained Zaven Collins in that. So he's a locker room leader, culture guy, another culture guy coming in. Harrison Phillips is the Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee for the Bills. And now they're bringing in this guy that taught all the the veteran that taught all the rookies, that kind of thing. So they're clearly prioritizing that kind of culture thing. All that's great. He played and he's a nice guy. Okay, but how is he good is the question. And of course, without going into a super deep film study that would take me much more than the half a day between when he was signed and when I'm recording this, you're going to kind of have to take a place like PFF's word for it. He's fine, I guess, according to all of that. But based on, the research you can do kind of in the instant reaction, he seems like a jack of all trades, master of none. And what's interesting is in Philadelphia, he played a lot more of a drop back coverage role, classic linebacker stuff, run defense coverage and blitz every once in a while. And then in Arizona, they blitzed him a lot more. And Arizona might just be a more blitz-happy team in general, so everybody blitzed more. But still worth noting that his pass rushing presence in Arizona was very similar to the pass rushing presence Anthony Barr has had in Minnesota. Very similar ratios of how often they rush and how often they cover on pass downs. So the reason I bring this up is because the first question I think everybody has when the Vikings go out and sign a starting caliber linebacker is, okay, does this guy replace Kendricks or Barr? Both of them obviously have their question marks about who's staying and who's going. Are they both staying? Are they both leaving? If we can figure out what role this guy has, I've seen a lot of people say, well, this is your Barr replacement. And a lot of people say this means they're trading Kendricks. And which is it, right? Or maybe it's both. I guess it could be both. But I guess in Philadelphia, he played more of a Kendricks role. And in Arizona, he played more of a Barr role. And it seemed like that went a little better for Philadelphia than it did in Arizona. His play in Arizona didn't seem, at least PFF didn't like it. All that said, he still has his highlights and he's still clearly a starting caliber linebacker. He just struggled a little bit more with the more physical role. And look, he's 230 pounds. Size-wise, he's a lot closer to Eric Kendricks than he is to Anthony Barr, who's got 20 pounds on him and is kind of a unique sized guy. So maybe the Anthony Barr role was a mistake for Arizona and he should play a more coverage oriented kind of classic off ball linebacker kind of role. So what he'll actually play, I'm going to be honest with y'all, I kind of have no idea. And I think what the Vikings do next with Barr and or Kendricks will tell us a little bit about that. Obviously, there's the weird contract dynamic with Anthony Barr that because he is today, his contract voids. On Wednesday, today, his contract will void, which means he gets cut, which means all of his dead cap accelerates, which means he's going to cost about $9.8 million against the cap in dead cap, and he'll leave and go sign with somebody else. If they signed him to even a 1-year deal, that acceleration wouldn't happen. He would still have $4.9 million in prorated bonus money that you're paying off that isn't part of the new deal. So add whatever the new deal is to that. That's his cap hit. And then a $4.9 million thing next year. So you're paying it kind of half at a time instead of all at once. And that's the Anthony Barr deal. And then, of course, if you trade away Eric Kendricks, it saves you some money as well. So whatever happens with that happens. And I honestly kind of thought it was going to be a similar thing as with Harrison Phillips, where we see the signing and then we see what happened to make room for the signing, who he's replacing and stuff. There's also a world where all three of them play at the same time, where you could have Anthony Barr play a more defensive line-esque role, have him play the jack linebacker is kind of what I've been calling it, that hybrid role where he's really a more specialized pass rusher but does drop into coverage some and would rush the passer more than he did with Zimmer. You could have him play that role. I'm not a big fan of that at all because Barr's 255 pounds. He's going to get swallowed by tackles, and he often gets swallowed by tackles. The goal of that was just to make it so they had to assign a tackle to Anthony Barr, and that's kind of a waste of their resources, which you can exploit, and turning him into a more dedicated pass rusher, as much as that's what everybody's been asking for. I've always thought that that's a really bad idea. I wouldn't want to do that, but that would be a way to get all three linebackers on, and then, both Kendricks and Hicks play off the ball, and then you have Anthony Barr essentially being part of the line of scrimmage, front line defense. I don't love it, but that would be how that works. But really, the question is, who does he replace? Who should he replace? What are these roles? What skill sets do they take? And how does Jordan Hicks fall into all of that? And then, of course, the Michael Pierce thing coming up as well. But first, let me talk to you about the best tasting protein bar on the planet. It is Built Bar. Built Bars are absolutely delicious, covered in 100% chocolate, like 130 calories in one of these bad boys, so it's not going to knock you off the wagon. They've got Built Puffs. That's their marshmallowy kind. I have no idea how they pulled that science off, but it's like they're made with collagen protein. So they're super chock full of protein, 17 grams of protein and only 4 grams of sugar. And somehow they got that texture to set up like a marshmallow and cover that in chocolate. And it tastes like you're eating a marshmallow candy bar. It's magic. It's awesome. And they've got their main series, standard flavors, chocolate caramel, chocolate orange, if you're into that, chocolate mint, cookies and cream, all that stuff. You could get that as well. So head on over to built.com, enter promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15. That's all one word, LOCKED15. You can get 15% off of your order at built.com. Hey, if you haven't yet, make sure you check out the Locked On NFL podcast on YouTube. You can find me there on Tuesdays, but a lot of good free agency recap stuff going on over there. Go check it out. Let's talk about Barr and Kendricks here and the role that Jordan Hicks might take and kind of what that would mean. The role that Eric Kendricks would play, we'll start there, in a Vic Fangio defense is one I've had a little bit of trouble deciding how much I care about how good that player is, like what the positional value of that role is. It's not your average everyday Mike linebacker who's like an interior run stuffing thumper that might have the green dot and, or maybe he's a Tampa 2 linebacker. If you really want to go back into the old days of defense, Tampa 2, I say old days, like 2006, with the heyday of Tampa 2. Weirdly, I'm too young to think of the Tampa defenses versions of it, the Rondé Barber or whatever. I think of Brian Urlacher and the 2006 Bears, who went to the Super Bowl as like Tampa 2, because Brian Urlacher is that Tampa 2 roving middle linebacker that sort of roamed the middle of the field, picked things off, was also just a like force wrecker in the run game, but also played a bunch of like deep zones and stuff. If you're not, it's not that guy in the Fangio scheme. But in the Fangio scheme, and we've talked about this a lot, they use a lot of fronts that flatten out, which means a lot of players are right up on the line of scrimmage, and that stresses the offense in certain ways. But that means there are fewer players off the ball to clean things up if the running back does find his way through, or if it's a slant or something like that. If they find a way to get the ball past that really flattened out line of scrimmage, there's fewer players to clean that up, and so that can lead to big plays. And that's kind of the job of the Mike linebacker, to be the first line of defense against that, and to make that so, you did a slant, it's only a 6-yard gain though. That sounds like a really important position, but as I've kind of said before, a lot of Fangio defenses do not invest very much in it. It's Alexander Johnson, who I don't think was drafted, or the Chargers and Rams, Staley or Staley offshoot defense, and then the Staley defense with the Chargers, also not exactly spending crazy money on that position. But then you have the Bears, who have Roquan Smith, and they're running that same style of defense. And Roquan Smith racking up a ton of tackles. So what I get with the Eric Kendricks role, what it would be here if he's not traded, would be like the guy that cleans up, and he'll lead the team in tackles by 1 million, but actually that job might not be that hard, I guess, is the guess that I have, or at least as far as NFL jobs go. I think it was Justice Mosqueda calls them trained dogs. Like just get a trained dog that knows how to see ball, get ball, and play reactively like that. And that can kind of be that position. If you're in a 5-1 front, meaning 5 up on the line and 1 off the ball, he's the one. And that means he's not going to be as often involved in the run game. He doesn't have to be a super athlete, even though Jordan Hicks is a very athletic player. He tested unbelievably at the combine and stuff. He doesn't have to be super athletic. And of course, I think he'd be entering year 8 of his career, so maybe not. But he doesn't have to be super athletic. He just has to generally be able to see the ball and go chase it down. And so you can kind of see the trained dogs thing. To see the ball and go chase it down. And maybe anybody can do that, even though that's the guy that's going to rack up all the tackles and look like the superstar and all that and be a great IDP player, right? But what skill set does that actually involve? Maybe that's kind of a waste of Eric Kendricks' talents. And if you have that sort of inefficiency, maybe flipping it for draft picks and replacing it with a cheaper player would be the move there, right? That's me talking myself into this, even though I'd be very sad if Eric Kendricks left. That might be the logic behind the move. But at the same time, if you're giving up on your chance to have a Roquan Smith-esque impact on your defense to go cheaper and get worse, I kind of can't stand that, right? I can't stand cheaper but worse. You can't put that cap space on the field. Making the team worse when you're selling yourself as a team that's trying to contend is, I think, really backwards. And that's kind of all they've done so far if they get rid of like Eric Kendricks and replace him with Jordan Hicks, who just isn't the same caliber of player. But maybe Jordan Hicks will be replacing Anthony Barr, which I think body-wise and skill set-wise makes a little bit more sense. He's a very physical linebacker. He's not as big as Anthony Barr, but he does rush the passer, and he covers, and he's got good run defense, and he kind of does everything, and he can do a little man-to-man. He can cover a tight end. Again, jack of all trades, master of none. And that Sam linebacker, that can be really helpful because that guy, you want to ask him to do a lot of different things over the course of the game. You want the defense or the offense to constantly be thinking, is that guy blitzing? Is he going to play run first or pass first? Is he playing zone or man? He can do all of those things. He can that guy can't be a tell for us because of his versatility. Therefore, we have to look at our read elsewhere, and it's that much harder for us. That's kind of what you want out of that position. And he's very physical. He's very strong, and he's got the explosiveness and all that stuff, even though he's not Anthony Barr athletic, but Anthony Barr isn't Anthony Barr athletic anymore either. So what are we actually choosing between here? And maybe the only reason to keep Anthony Barr around would be if you wanted to do it as a cheeky way to keep cap space. But even that, you could do something like sign him to some unguaranteed deal so the void year money, dead money, doesn't accelerate in that way, and then cut him after June 1st. You could, I think, do something like that. I don't think that's illegal. But you could do something like that if the cap is like literally the only reason that could be something. So I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. That's kind of fun, right? I'm sitting here on the edge of my seat. I'm in grand suspense. But the league year is about to turn over. It might have already turned over by the time you're listening to this, depending on if you listen on your way to work or home from work or on your lunch break or whatever. So maybe it already has, and you probably know more than me at this point. So let me at least go to a different topic here. We're going to talk about Michael Pierce and what happened there, and maybe that gives us a little bit of insight into how Ed Donatel is going to run his defense. So on yesterday's episode, I was talking about the Harrison Phillips signing, and I actually, to full disclosure, I actually did a whole segment about the Bear front and how that was going to be the way that they use Pierce and Tomlinson and Phillips all at the same time. And then they cut Michael Pierce in the middle of me recording that, and I sort of had to go back and delete the old stuff. Maybe we'll talk about the Bear front another time, because I thought it was still an interesting discussion. But that meant that I didn't really have all the full details when I talked about the Michael Pierce thing. It happened right in the middle of me recording, so let me catch up if you haven't already heard this. So Darren Wolfson went on Score North and gave a couple of scoops about that, and here's the sequence of events as he described it. Essentially, Michael Pierce was a little uncomfortable with the idea of playing in this particular defensive scheme. This 3-4, with the talent around him, felt like he wasn't going to be able to shine enough. So that caused a little bit of discontent. And then it's unclear if the Vikings approached him about a pay cut, and then that dynamic made it more difficult to negotiate, or if Michael Pierce said, I want my release, and the Vikings countered with, well, what if we actually just kind of shortened your contract and did a pay cut as part of that instead? But either way, the Vikings offered in return to that. So Michael Pierce requested release. And if it were up to the Vikings, they would not have released Michael Pierce, which is a big bummer. But he requested his release, and the Vikings countered with taking off the final year of the deal and essentially doing what they did with Anthony Barr's, what the old regime did with Anthony Barr's contract. We're going to void out the rest of your deal. And and then said, but if we do that, you're going to take a pay cut this year or something. Michael Pierce said no to that. They tried to trade Michael Pierce. Nobody took the bait there, so they ended up releasing him. So all this stuff I talked about yesterday about how they were trying to get cheaper but worse, or all that stuff, I don't think was necessarily true. So I think we have to probably think about it a different way, where now it's more about the Michael Pierce thing didn't work out. It's sort of the cost of changing scheme. You had a guy brought in to do one scheme, didn't feel comfortable in the next scheme, and he wanted to move on, and that's going to be the sort of awkward transitional stuff we end up dealing with as free agency wears on. It's not going to be a perfectly smooth transition. As much as I thought Michael Pierce was a pretty good fit for this, I guess he disagrees with me, so we'll have to dive into that. But then Harrison Phillips is very much the backup plan. So in my assessment that Harrison Phillips is not as good of an asset as Michael Pierce, the Vikings agree. And their actions agree with it. And by all reports, if they could choose all things the same between having Michael Pierce and having Harrison Phillips, they would have chosen Michael Pierce, but Michael Pierce didn't want to be around. So big bummer, but that's how it goes when you change everything out, right? And these are the growing pains. Pain can't come without a little change, or change can't come without a little pain. But isn't that a little intriguing that the Vikings switched to a 3-4, and then the guy who played most of his career in a Wink Martindale 3-4 says, I'm not a scheme fit? That confused me a little bit, and I had to kind of think it through and look into it. I actually have an article coming out at Zone Coverage today that sort of talks about it. But I mean, it's different, right? A Fangio scheme, and this is why I've sort of been pushing back on the idea of calling it a 3-4, even though I've fallen into that habit a little bit myself. The Fangio scheme is less a 3-4 and more a hybrid scheme. And the better way to think about it is, what techniques do the linemen play? Do they one gap? Do they two gap? Do they gap and a half? I've explained that a few times, but if you missed all that, All that means is, is every player responsible for one gap and one gap only? Or do you have some players responsible for two gaps at the same time, and that's a harder job, but you put that on your best player, and then everybody else can easily have one gap? Or do you play gap and a half, where everybody has a primary gap and a secondary gap, and if the run goes into your secondary gap, you flash across your lineman's face and go attack that secondary gap, but you don't park yourself there? And then everybody has a primary and secondary gap. So hopefully every gap has somebody responsible for it and somebody else flashing into it. And that's kind of the idea there, but you have to have a lot of control over your blocker to do that. That's the one the Vikings will, I think, be playing, is a little bit more gap and a half. Although the Fangio schemes in the past have done some two gapping. They've utilized a little bit sometimes by having, a big giant nose tackle in there. So whatever the Vikings are planning on doing, Michael Pierce didn't think that was going to be right for him. And I guess that's just really interesting. And of course, it's a big bummer. The relationship with the Vikings and Michael Pierce just never materialized in the way that you as a fan would hope. And now Harrison Phillips comes in. He's a little bit smaller. He'll probably play a little bit more of the, I guess I'd call it like the under tackle, or the three technique-esque role that exists between like an end and, a big beefy nose tackle. And then Dalvin Tomlinson would be the big beefy nose tackle, which is probably a little bit more comfortable for him. But again, it is a setup, and maybe I'll go on a little rant here. The Vikings haven't really gotten better yet. Unless they are keeping Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr, they are replacing one of those players with Jordan Hicks, who I don't think is he might be better than Anthony Barr by now, just because of Anthony Barr's athleticism. So maybe they've gotten a little better there. But look, last year the team went 8-9 in response to this, and in insisting that they are contenders, that they've got a good foundation. Maybe they just think they were a little unlucky and just need a little boost in coaching, and that's all they needed. In the face of insisting on all of that they were just a hair away from being a true contender, they have kept the quarterback the same, and very proudly have done so, and they would super defend doing that. They've kept a couple of specialists, they've downgraded at nose tackle, and they probably downgraded at a linebacker position unless they end up keeping both of those guys. That is not very inspiring. And yeah, they've gotten some assets and some money, and they wouldn't make all that money in cap space if they didn't intend to use it on somebody. They also will probably have some other stuff coming on. Also in that Score North episode, Darren Wolfson said that expect some Danielle Hunter news today. You might have already heard it by the time you listen to this. And also that Adam Thielen is mulling over a pay cut and might be pretty likely to take that. So there's all that stuff too. So there's going to be more cap space, and that cap space is going to go to something, and you would assume that something makes the Vikings better. So of course, far from complete, but I think it's okay to be a little concerned that everything the Vikings have done is basically running it back, but worse so far. And what moves can they make to not only make up the difference from the losses that they've suffered, but also, and all of the departing free agents, you're losing your whole corner room. I mean, the roster's in bad shape right now. So what moves can they make with that extra little sliver of cap space they got by going from Pierce to Harrison Phillips and taking on a bunch of dead money? What move are they going to make that puts them over the top and makes them a Super Bowl contender? I'm a little concerned about this. And look, a rebuild is fine. I've said it, I get it. You're in a transition year. It's the first year of a new regime. I'm not going to have the highest expectations for that in the first place. And if you need to do something to transition from what the old regime built to what you're trying to build, I would be sympathetic to that. But they were adamant that's not what's happening here, that they're going to be able to go right back and say, we're a playoff team, fear us. Well, show me something to fear then, because I'm getting a little worried. But obviously, you can't pass final judgment until everything's over. So we're going to continue to talk about this every single day, and then when it's over, we'll reassess. Not an auspicious start is, I guess, the way that I'll put it so far. But I do like the Jordan Hicks signing. I like him as a player. I think he's totally fine as a player, and he's totally cheaper, and that's fine. And maybe if he replaces Eric Kendricks, like I said, maybe they don't need that good of a player there because of the way the scheme works out. So we'll figure it all out. The picture will become clearer as more of the things happen, and we'll just kind of have to take it all as it comes. So I hope you come around and listen for all of that as well. In the meantime, check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast while you wait for the next move to drop. I will talk to you all about whatever it is. I'll talk to you about it tomorrow. And as always, Skol.